Okay, so you've been programming for a little while and you've discovered this neat thing called getline that you can use to read input from the keyboard without needing to read each word individually into separate variables using cin. So it's great, right? You can consume the spaces, everything, just grab it all in one go. But then you've noticed that your program starts acting really weird. What's going on? Well, there's a good chance that you've mixed usage of cin with getline, and that has some ramifications that aren't immediately apparent. And so what I would like to do is talk to you a little bit about what happens when you mix cin with getline, what's causing the problem you may be seeing, and give you a clue as to how you might deal with it. So it turns out the problem that gets created, it can be nuanced in many different ways. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but at least understanding the problem, you should be able to deduce what you need to do for your particular circumstances. So let's take a look. As a reminder, our cin object does not talk directly to the keyboard, but rather it gets information that was sent by the keyboard into a buffer. And when we use cin to read a variable, it will pull from the buffer until it sees white space. And I should say white space following the thing we asked for. So if there's white space on the top of the buffer, then cin will discard it, and then it will read the thing, if it can, it will read the thing that we've asked for, and then it will leave any white space that's behind it, and that will still be in the buffer. And we're going to see that that is actually the source of our problems when we're dealing with getline and cin mixed together. Getline works differently, so here I'm using it with this line of code. Getline is going to read everything that it sees in the buffer until it sees a new line, at which point it will consume the new line and then stop. So those differences in behavior, wherein cin will leave a new line character in the buffer and getline will consume it, where cin will, if it first sees white space, get rid of it, looking for the thing you've asked it to read, and getline will simply respond to that white space. If it's a space, it'll keep it, and if it's a new line, it's going to see it as a new line. So let's demonstrate the problem. It's possible everything I said you already knew, but maybe you haven't connected the dots in terms of how those two things will interact. So let's just look at an example to demonstrate it. So here I have a simple program in which I have a string for a name and a birth date. And first I ask the user to give their name, and I'll use cin to read the name. And then I'll just echo back what they gave me. Then I'm going to use getline, passing it the cin object, to read from the keyboard the birth date. And the reason I'm doing this in this way is that the birth date might include, they might type out the month as a word. There's many formats they might use. So an easy thing to do here is just say, hey, read the whole line, and we'll just store that as the birth date. And then I'm going to echo the birth date back. Then we've got some other things down here that I may or may not discuss as we're talking about this. Okay, so let's compile and run this and just verify. Where's my cursor? There we go. Just verify that it at least does what we expect when we do the right things. There at the bottom. Jump this up. Okay, so G++, and you know, I don't remember what I called that file. So let's take a quick peek at it. Cin versus getline. Sounds like they're in an argument of some kind, and they kind of are. There we go. So please enter your name. To begin with, I'm just going to play along and type Frank. You entered Frank. Please enter your birth date. You entered blank. Please enter a string. I didn't enter anything for my birth date. What on earth happened? All right, let's rewind and take a look at our diagram over here. Try to walk through what just transpired. So the first thing I was asked to do is enter my name. And so I typed Frank and hit enter. So that's going to place F-R-A-N-K. And then here's the key. and a new line character. Okay, that's what got put in the buffer. Now, switch back to the code here. There's this cin that's immediately trying to read a string into this name variable. And so it sees the F, says, hey, that's the beginning of a string, and starts reading. It reads all the way down to the new line and leaves the new line. So let's just consume those. Okay, so we've simulated that situation now where cin read frank out of the buffer and placed that inside of the variable name and then echoed it back. And we saw that worked properly. Then we reach here, this line where we said, hey, please enter your birth date. The next command says getline. Now, if there's nothing in the buffer, it's going to sit and wait. But there is something in the buffer, and it happens to be a new line. And as mentioned earlier, getline is going to try to read as much as it can until it sees the new line, at which point it will consume the new line and call it done. And so that's exactly what happened here. So if we go back and look at the output we got, after the birth date, we were then going to ask for another string, and that's where we are. So it read the whole line, which was nothing more than a new line that ended the line, and then moved on. Said, hey, you entered nothing. Why nothing? Well, because it read exactly everything before the new line, which was precisely nothing. And so that's what we see. Okay, so that's the problem. How do we solve it? Very carefully. Okay, so we want to make sure we fully understand what's going on in terms of the way that our program is supposed to run, what the user is going to be doing, and the input that we're expecting, and so on and so forth. And that might make things a little more complicated than what I'm about to do here. In this case, the issue is simply that when the user enters their name and hits enter, there is now a new line character at the top of the buffer after cin reads in that name. And that's what's causing the issue here. So, simple way to deal with that is that after we have dealt with the cin statement and we know that that new line character is there from the user hitting enter, which they had to do in order to get that input into the buffer, in order to get rid of it, we can use something called cin.ignore, or perhaps more properly said, we can use a method called ignore that belongs to the cin object, or that's attached to the cin object. That's how we'll just say that for now. So we call this method, which is a method being just a function that's attached to a class. And what this is going to do now is when cin.ignore is called in this way with no arguments, it's simply going to take the first character out of the buffer and toss it away. And in this case, that's the new line that we're wanting to get rid of. So let's see if that fixed our problem. Find my cursor, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to, I guess I need to type some stuff in here real quick. So we'll enter a string, hello, an integer. We'll run this to completion from where it was. Now you'll notice we had the same kind of problem happen. That's because further down in the code I replicated it just to show you, look, even if I'm entering integers, it does the same thing. But that's probably not that significant. You already most likely got the idea. So we'll just let this thing finish. Okay, so now we'll recompile and run it. Please enter your name. Say Frank. Enter your birth date, and now notice it's actually waiting for me to enter my birth date. So I'll say something, dot, dot, dot. You entered something, something. So it appears to be working. Now again, the same problem exists further down where we try to enter an integer with cin, and then there's a get line following it, and so we have that problem again. So we could fix it there as well. So maybe a useful point to note is that you're going to need to do this each time that you have a get line following a CN. Does this fix everything? Absolutely not. So let's finish this up. Or I should say, does this fix every possible problem? And there we go. And that the answer is no, as I'm sure you've already assumed. But let's take a look at something else that could go wrong. Please enter your name. Well, my name is Frank Jones. And so now when I hit enter, you entered Frank, and it says, please enter your birth date. You entered Jones. Now this one should be a little easier for us to detect what's going on, just based on the way the CN behaves. I said Frank space Jones. It interpreted that as a string Frank, followed by a space, and then another string Jones when I tried to use CN. So we didn't get to type a line because getline already found one. It was just the remainder of the first line that we typed. I'm getting lost here, that we typed right here. Okay, so it doesn't fix everything to simply use CN.ignore. Had we done that in this case, all it would have done is skipped the space in front of Jones and still read Jones, hit the new line, instead the line was Jones. And so you still need to pay attention to what's happening and maybe think about what could go wrong and do your best to handle it. In the end, trying to anticipate everything that a user might do is kind of a losing battle, but we do our best, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of a notion of how you can at least handle this issue with CN and getline and how they interact when they're mixed. Quick point before I end, and that is, please note that we don't have a problem when we have a getline followed by a CN. And why would that be okay? Well, the getline consumed everything, including the new line character, and so the CN just sees a buffer that has what it's looking for, if it was entered properly. If the new line was left, CN would have been okay anyway, because it would have started by chucking away white space. But either way, a CN that came after a getline is generally fine. It's the getline after a CN that you have to be careful of. Thanks.